But what this number really represents is an estimation of how long you can practically hold your FTP before you start to fatigue. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Sarah and I make videos about health and fitness and all of those things endurance sports. So if you've ever been compelled in a job interview to answer that age-old question of what are your hobbies and interests with things like suffering and sweating, you've come to the right place and you should probably hit those buttons down below. I would recommend against answering the question that way, however, they may get the wrong idea. I'm just saying. But hitting those buttons is a great idea, so fire away. Quick disclaimer before we get into this video, please excuse the chipmunk cheek. I had a little Novocaine yesterday, must have hit a sensitive spot there, so a little bit of swelling, nothing a couple of days and some public humiliation can't solve here, right? But I might stutter or spit when I talk. It's a little bit tight here, so you won't get wet. The lens, however, I can't say the same for, but feel free to make fun of me in the comments. It is what it is. We have to continue to move forward. No use crying over spilled milk or swollen cheeks, right? But today we are talking about workout number 5 in the Zwift Academy. This one is upper threshold blocks. Not really sure why it's called upper threshold blocks. I mean, there are a couple of intervals at your upper threshold, but I don't know that it really speaks to the theme of the workout all that well. It is what it is. Again, not trying to gatekeep nomenclature, but things are getting a little bit odd for block number 2 here for the threshold workouts. But as has been the case for the past several videos, I'm going to talk a little bit about the intended benefit of the workout. We'll talk about the structure, and then I'll give any additional tips. Most of them are going to carry over from the past 4 videos, but maybe a couple of unique insights for this particular workout that will help to get through this workout strong and prepared. So let's start with the intended benefit of this workout. This is another threshold workout. This is aimed at increasing your threshold, your ability to be a little bit more fatigue resistant at your threshold range. But more aptly, this particular style of workout where you see these shorter blocks at your threshold zone or around your threshold zone with very short recoveries, this is a very foundational type of workout. These types of workouts are typically found in your base season and maybe early in your build season, so as you're approaching kind of your in-season or your goal events, where you are looking to build up your FTP, to build up your lactate threshold. You are working short periods of time at your threshold, and you are working those short periods of time for a couple of reasons. A, you probably haven't worked up that stamina to hold longer periods at your threshold, but B, you're looking to enhance on the quality and maybe push that number a little bit skyward, right? It's a little bit easier to push those few extra watts when you're only working at 5 minutes or 8 minutes at a time rather than 15 or 20 minutes at a time. So you are still getting a good amount of work, like if you've seen 5x5s out there before. So it's 5 minutes on with 1 minute recovery and then 5 minutes on again. You do that 5 times, you get 25 minutes worth of work into 29 minutes of actual clock time. That's going to still get you the same benefit of having that lactate building up in the system, but those brief 1 minute recoveries allow you to reset a little bit and get back in control of the quality so you're able to expand that and move throughout your season. Now, as a standalone, this workout isn't going to do a ton by itself. This workout is really designed to do in a threshold block or a building block during the course of your macro cycle or your year. And this is best done over the course of 8, 12, even 16 weeks. You see the results very slowly, but they are very important results. As you build week over week and you continue to build these short efforts upwards, you'll start to see increases over the course of several weeks. And then you'll end and go into the proper portion of your season where you really want to execute with a higher level of FTP. This is intended to be followed up with the next phase of training, which is to move to those longer intervals. It's all well and good to execute these 5-minute intervals and work that fatigue resistance and manage that lactate well, but practically speaking, you really have to string it together at some point. You're not necessarily going to be given those 1 minute to 90-second rests when you're out on the road. So you move into a more practical phase of your training where you are looking at something like 15-minute intervals, 20-minute intervals, 30-minute intervals. And that's going to be expanding on your execution. So FTP is driven up with the shorter intervals, and then your ability to execute at your FTP is expanded with those longer intervals. So they fit together kind of like a glove. It's the way that you periodize your training so that you can get the maximal execution of your FTP. I talked about this a little bit in the last video, where just because your FTP is 250 watts, let's say, does not necessarily mean you can hold 250 250 watts for an hour. There's actually a metric that is called TTE, or time to exhaustion. If you are a user of WKO4 or 5, you'll see this in the upper right-hand corner. You don't necessarily see this in the mainstream, but what this number really represents is an estimation of how long you can practically hold your FTP before you start to fatigue. If you were to, for instance, go out and do a FTP set for 1 hour, right? Maybe you're feeling a little masochistic that day and you want to hold your FTP for an hour. What you might find is that you're holding 250 watts for maybe the first 30 minutes. And then you start to see a little bit of a decline in power, right? You're not completely falling apart, but you're just dropping off the power a little bit. Maybe you end that 30 minutes at 230 watts. Now, somebody who doesn't understand the training science might say, well, then your FTP is an average over that 60 minutes. Maybe it's 240 watts. But that's really not the case. If you're able to hold 250 watts for 30 minutes, well, you're not working anaerobically, right? You're working at an aerobic state. You're working at a rate where your lactate production and clearance are pretty much at a steady state. But there are other elements to support that type of execution, which aren't just limited by lactate, right? We're talking about your fatigue resistance. We're talking about your general stamina. We're talking about your muscular endurance that you build through these workouts. So moving through this type of progression where you're building up your FTP and starting to bridge shorter efforts together with very short periods of rest and then moving into longer periods of time, that's going to move you in the direction where your time to exhaustion gets closer and closer to that 1 hour mark. If I asked a number of you out there right now to do 20 minutes at your FTP, I would bet my paycheck that a good portion of you are probably going to be a little bit terrified by that prospect. Like, I don't know if I can hold my FTP for 20 minutes. That's okay. We start somewhere, and everybody goes through this phase, right? You get to a point where you detrain a little bit, you go into your base phase, and then you have to build that back up. Many of you are coming out of the summer season where you may have just been doing a lot of fun riding, right? You haven't been doing a lot of work at your threshold, so maybe that energy system is a little underdeveloped at this point. Everybody from the beginner all the way up to the elite level cyclist is going to go through this type of phase. It's just about periodizing your training and developing and enhancing your FTP at all ability levels. So suffice it to say that this workout is one of those that is going to feed into that development phase, to be able to take this workout and use it over the course of several weeks in order to get the intended benefit. You know, I'm going to do a video, I think, at the end of the Zwift Academy to give my thoughts, not only on just the execution and some of the misses on the program end, but some of what I see as a bit of an opportunity for this type of program. And maybe it's a bit of a spoiler alert here, but you know, the 8-week format for this program is a bit limiting. Ideally speaking, if you were going to look at these two training blocks, right, the VO2 block and then the threshold block, they wouldn't be done over the course of 8 weeks. Each individual block would be given 8 weeks. That's really the way that you develop these energy systems. But the fact that people's attention spans aren't that high on a very gamified platform, and trying to make this accessible to the greatest audience, getting people to be on board for something like 4 to 6 months is not particularly practical, right? So they have to be able to right-size this for the entire platform and the general user base. So I understand that limitation. So I see this academy, which is probably good nomenclature for it, as a way to introduce you to these different types of workouts and these ideas so that you're familiar with the intended benefit. So then when you go after the 8 weeks and maybe decide to pursue a plan, whether you buy a plan or use a coach or try to build your own plan, you have those foundational ideas to say, okay, I understand what these workouts are targeting. I know where to strategically put them in my plan for the course of the 6 months to a year, or I understand why my training plan tells me to do this. Now I get what's going on here. So that's where I see the benefit in this program. And I'm not trying to insinuate that doing this 8 weeks is not doing anything but teaching you these different elements and that you won't get any physiological benefit, because you very likely will. If you're newer to structured training, just by merit of doing these types of workouts consistently and pushing yourself, you're going to see a benefit. If you haven't been doing structured training maybe for the past several weeks, like I said, many of you are just coming out of the summer season and just a lot of fun riding. Reactivating those different energy systems will be helpful. Even if you have been training with structure, introducing some different workouts and maybe stimulating the system in different ways can be beneficial. If you do these workouts over the course of these 8 weeks, however you decide to dice them up, you will see a training benefit. But what do you do at the end of the 8 weeks of the Zwift Academy program? You've got your unlocks in your hand and your graduation and all that fun stuff. It's like, okay, now what? Well, the now what is to take the knowledge and the ability that you've gleaned from this program and to carry it forward into a more holistic approach to your training. When it comes to training with structure, you don't just look at what's happening for the next 8 weeks. You really look at your goals and objectives and try to plan out for the year. What are you doing right now that's going to impact you 3, 6, 12 months down the line? So as you start to pursue structured training, if that's what you're interested in, take the foundations that you're learning from the Zwift Academy, what I can give you in these videos, and understand how to take them moving forward. So let's talk about the structure of this workout in particular. So this is going to be a 60-minute long workout, one of the longer ones in the series. You're going to get 30 minutes of work, so it's a decent amount of load in the system, and it's at a higher intensity, so you'll get a good TSS score out of a very short period of time here. And it's structured as follows. The first 10 minutes is going to be that same progressive ascending warm-up from 50% of your FTP up to 80% of your FTP, that 1-minute primer from 80 to about 92% of your FTP. You're going to get that 2-minute recovery valley at 55% of your FTP before you move into the 2 working sets. And the 2 working sets are actually mirror images of each other, and they are set up as 3x5s. So the first set is going to go 5 minutes at 105% of your FTP, followed by 1 minute and 30 seconds at 55% of your FTP. Then you get 5 minutes at your FTP. That's going to be followed by another minute and 30 seconds of recovery at 55% of your FTP, and then you're going to hit 95% of your FTP, and you're going to get a full break at 6 minutes, and that's going to be again at 55% of your FTP. Then you're going to do the mirror image set where you work your way back up the ladder. So you're going to start with 5 minutes at 95% of your FTP, 90 seconds of rest at 55%, then 5 minutes at your FTP, another 90 seconds of rest at 55%, and then the last 5 minutes is going to be at 105% of your FTP. And then you're going to get your 5-minute cool down, starting at 130% of your FTP and working your way down to about 45% of your FTP. Now, the reason that you're seeing these kind of descending and ascending efforts is to work a little bit more in terms of fatigue resistance. That first effort of 5 minutes is above your FTP, so now you're really taxing the system and building in a bunch of lactate as you work your way down the stair steps and try to clear it, even though you don't have a whole ton of opportunity to do that. You've got those 90-second breaks, but it's not really enough to fully clear that lactate before you hit it again at your FTP. And then as you go to the second set, you're working your way back up. So this is not only a physiological demand because you're working more and more time at or around your threshold and work into the legs, you're going to start to really feel that burn, but you're going to have to hit that last effort at the highest execution of power with that fatigue and deal with that mentally. So it's kind of a twofold benefit there, right? A lot of these workouts have been kind of fitting that paradigm where they're really pushing you at the last set. That's really the most important set to hit. They could very easily have just replicated that set one to the next and just kind of stair step you down yet again so that you kind of mentally get on board with the fact like, okay, the next one's going to be a little bit easier. Okay, the last one's going to be easier. You don't get that opportunity here. You really have to work your way up that ladder again and work that fatigue resistance where you really are running out of that energy. When you hit that last interval, you're going to have 25 minutes worth of threshold level work in the legs, and you're going to have to hit right at the top of the threshold range. So it is going to be pretty challenging as you hit the end of that interval, but it's just a bit of a variation of what I was talking about, right? You'll see these played out a number of different ways. This is set up as 2 blocks of 15 minutes more or less of work versus a 5x5. You'll see these as 4x8s. You'll see a number of different workouts like this. This one just happens to be designed as it is so that it works a little bit more of that fatigue resistance piece, not just the FTP booster piece. Now, in terms of the tips I have for this workout, pretty similar to the prior tips, right? I'm not going to go too much into detail and be repetitious for those of you who've been following along with this series. Rest and recovery, definitely ideal. I came into this workout a little bit fatigued and I did struggle quite a bit. Heart rate was a little bit resistant towards the end, so probably relying a little bit more on my anaerobic system as I got towards the end of these workouts. Legs were a little bit stiff. It is what it is, but I should have come into this workout a little bit more fresh. Come in fueled. Again, this is sugar burning. You're doing 30 minutes of work at your FTP or your zone 4, so you want to be able to make sure that you have available sugars on board, whether you take it in ride or right before the ride, just so that you have that maximal opportunity to achieve that higher level of power execution. As I have mentioned in a couple of the previous workouts, cadence is one of those things that will start to drop off as you fatigue. I think they actually have a couple of prompts to mention that as well. So again, giving yourself some room for attrition, if you can kind of start some of these intervals with a little bit higher than where you want to settle in. If you think you're going to settle in around 85 RPM, maybe you start at 95 RPM, right? Start with a little less torque in the legs and let your body settle in. If you start 85 RPM or even start lower because you're using a lower spin rate coming out of the recovery, you might give yourself nowhere to go as the body starts to fatigue and just naturally starts to rely on more torque. It's just what we do naturally. You can set yourself up to offset that a little bit by starting those intervals a little bit higher. Now, on the note of the recovery intervals, I would recommend to try to drive up that cadence higher than you would really want to. You may feel inclined during those 90-second recovery valleys to really drive that cadence down, to try to bring the heart rate down. But if you can bring that cadence up to a higher rate, you actually can have a better effect at spinning out the lactate a little bit to be able to take some of the tension out of the legs, and you can go into the next interval with a little bit less tension built up in the legs. It may feel counterintuitive, it may feel like it's hard to bring that leg speed up, but if you can kind of maybe get out of the saddle, get on top of erg mode a little bit, get that spin rate a little bit higher, you may find, especially towards the second set, that this will bring you into the next interval or the final interval a little better suited with a little less tension baked into the legs. These intervals are ideally done seated. These are the type of executions you would see as you might be climbing for a steady state in a time trial position. So the best that you can do to practice them seated, the better off you're going to be. But as you get towards the end, things are going to fatigue. They might get a little bit tight. You have to stand for 5 or 10 seconds to just kind of clear some of that tension, use different muscle systems, especially if you're very quad dominant. That's certainly fine. There's no problem in doing that. If you get to that last interval and you really need to finish it standing, that's fine too, whatever it takes to get through those intervals. But what I do want you to pay attention to is your body position and the wasted energy. If you're just kind of death gripping on those bars, you've got your shoulders up in your ears, if your arms are locked out, if you're lumbering all over the bike, catch yourself, focus on those things, and try to get back in control and to take all of that energy that you're using up here and put it down into the lower body. You want that energy in your legs. I think there's a couple of reminders as well in some of the on-screen prompts, so heed those on-screen prompts. It's really great to have those periodic reminders say, oh yeah, what the heck am I doing? I'm kind of all over the place. I checked myself a couple times in this workout. Legs were feeling a little bit tired and I started to be a little bit wiggly in the upper body, and I had to check myself and stay still in the upper body, and for a second or two it felt uncomfortable to do that, and then I realized I was driving more power into the lower body. So one of those things to be cognizant of. In terms of heart rate, what you'll probably find is that your first couple of intervals, your heart rate is not going to reach your threshold level heart rate. What tends to happen is we rely a little bit more on those anaerobic systems to support the power. That's very natural. That's why you're going to start to feel maybe some burn in the legs, and you're working anaerobically without working in your anaerobic zone. There's a lot more science to that maybe I'll cover in a different video. But you'll see that the heart rate may stay a little bit lower for the first 2 intervals, and even if your power execution goes down for that 3rd interval, your heart rate may actually be higher as you start engaging more of that aerobic system. So you may see that throughout the workout. And then of course towards the end you'll see your heart rate continue to either stay steady state or rise towards the last interval as your power level increases. So pretty typical to see that. As I mentioned in the last video, you don't want to see that spike into your threshold too fast, right? Because you're not necessarily giving the heart rate the time to adapt. So if you're spiking into your threshold heart rate right away, your FTP might be set incorrectly. So revisit that, but hopefully during the course of workout number 4, you've gotten the better established FTP around that value. If you struggled through that workout, maybe you've made the commensurate adjustments to go into this workout. But that's pretty much it, guys. I know that there's a lot of information coming at you. There's a lot of science and information around your lactate threshold or your FTP. I'm doing my best to distill this in a manner that's giving you the information that you might want or you might need to get the best benefit and adherence out of these workouts, but not so much that, you know, your eyes are rolling back into your head, because at the end of the day, you don't necessarily need to know all the nitty-gritty of this stuff. But I hope that you guys are finding these videos helpful. If you have gotten any value out of this video, please hit that like button. It really does help out the channel and the video quite a bit. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.